All right, so let's talk general principles with the muscles. Muscle movement often happens where you've got kind of two sides of the coin. We talked about this when we talked about movement with the joints. So we've got, let's say, flexion and we've got extension. These are opposing movements to each other. So when it comes to the muscle movement, much like what we discussed in chapter 8, it's opposite of each other. They oppose each other. So the movement that you want would be accomplished by a muscle called an agonist, okay? So let's say I want to flex my arm, right? I want to flex this. Then the bicep would be considered my agonist. That's the movement that I want. Now, the antagonist, just like in English, when you're reading a book and they say, who's the antagonist? And it's the bad guys. So you've got Avengers, and Thanos is the antagonist because he's the bad guy, right? So you got the agonist, and then the antagonist is the one that opposes the movement or does the opposite movement. So you've got the bicep curling your arm or causing flexion. You've got the tricep back here actually preventing that action. Okay, so again, it's just two names. You've got the agonist doing one thing. You've got the antagonist doing the opposite thing. All right. So muscles also tend to function in groups to accomplish specific movements. So even with the bending of my arm, there are at least two muscles that are working to accomplish that movement. One of them is the biceps that I was just talking about, the biceps brachii. The other is called the brachialis. So both of them are working to get your arm to bend. And because they're both working to get your arm to bend, we call them synergists, okay? They work together in sync to actually get your arm to bend. The thing about groups of muscles like this, though, is that groups of muscles like this will actually have one that does most of the work, kind of like working in groups in school, right? There's always the one person who does most of the work. So that muscle is called the prime mover, okay? And in the case of the two muscles that work to bend my arm, the prime mover, believe it or not, is not the bicep. It's actually the brachialis muscle. The brachialis muscle is the one that does most of the work to get the arm to bend. So synergists are the biceps brachii and the brachialis, but the prime mover, the one doing most of the work, is going to be, is going to be the brachialis muscle. Hang on one second. All right. So the fixators. The fixators are going to be the muscles that hold things in place relative to something else moving. So again, don't ask, I don't know. All of a sudden the computer's not lighting me up like it was whenever I would get close to it. So yeah, sorry. All right, so we've got the synergists, the ones that are working together to bend my arm. Now let's say I'm at the gym and I'm doing curls, right? I don't want my humerus moving all over the place while I'm trying to do these curls, right? That would just, one, look weird, but two, it would actually cause problems if I'm trying to isolate the muscles in my upper arm. So I've got other muscles that basically fix or hold my humerus so that as my radius and my ulna are moving, there isn't kind of a fight going on to isolate the muscle that I want to work on. All right. So let's talk about the muscle shapes. So the shape and size of a muscle influence the degree with which it can contract, as well as the amount of force that is going to be generated by that contraction. Meaning that depending on how you have your fibers arranged, you can either get a really tight contraction, maybe a really large contraction, but it is influenced by how you arrange those fibers. So we're going to talk about three primary types of fiber arrangement. We've got, other direction, We've got pennate, which literally translated means feather. We've got straight, which literally translated means straight. And we've got orbicular. So orb. If you think of the word orb, what do you think of? Any ghost hunters out there? You think of a sphere, right? So when you look at orbicular muscles, they are arranged in a circle. So pennate means feather, and we've got 3 of those that we're going to discuss. Straight, like I said, it means straight. They're all arranged in the same manner. And then orbicular, we've got a circular arrangement, okay? Maybe? Okay. Wrong computer. So let's talk pennate first. Pennate, like I said, means feather. So think about the classic, feather shape that we've got. Where did I put my marker? The classic feather shape that we have looks like this, right? So we've got kind of this central axis with these barbs coming off of it. And that one central axis has 2 sets of barbs coming off of the middle. We call that bipennate, okay? Just like a feather, you've got this central axis and then these fascicles are coming off of it in 2 directions, on 2 sides. Semipennate, semi means half, right? So you've got that central axis, but only one side actually has the barbs coming off of it. So semipennate can also be known as unipennate. Unipennate because instead of having it coming off of 2 sides, you only have it come off of 1. All right, now multipennate. Basically, the fasciculi are arranged in many places and around that central axis. If you look at this muscle right here, you still have that central axis, but these fasciculi are coming off in multiple directions. That actually does give you quite a bit of freedom of movement when it comes to that joint, because instead of just going this way or this way, going in the direction of the fascicles, or only going in one direction because you only have fascicles going in that one direction, now you've got the ability to kind of pull in separate directions or different directions. Now, with the straight arrangement, the fasciculi are arranged parallel to each other along a long axis. So what's the benefit of this? What's the not so much benefit of this? 1, the muscles, because all of the fasciculi are arranged in the exact same direction, can shorten to a greater degree. So you can get this muscle to become shorter than maybe another muscle that's in the pennate orientation. But the problem is that even though all of the fascicles are arranged all in the same direction, not all of the fascicles go from one end to the other end. Some of them are on one side or on the other side, but they don't go all the way across. So because of that, you actually have less force behind that contraction. It doesn't contract as hard because you don't have all of these fascicles basically going from end to end and yanking on both sides of the tendon. Some of them only yank from one end, some of them only yank from the other. Orbicular. The fasciculi are arranged in a circle around an opening, and they act as sphincters, basically opening and closing things. Most of you have probably heard of sphincters already. When you think about the anus and going to the restroom, or think about the urethra and urinating, you've got sphincters there that basically act like the drawstring on a trash bag. When you close them, they close. When you open them or relax them, they open. The other places that you have sphincters that maybe you haven't thought about are around your mouth here, which allows you to do that kissy motion, and then around your eyes here, that allows you to really kind of shut your eyes. These circular muscles allow you to close those circles. That's how they work, because like a drawstring on a trash bag, you've got that kind of circular closure going on, because as the muscles contract and they get smaller, they close that space in the middle. So muscles are often named according to these things. One is location. So pectoralis, the gluteus, the brachial. Remember at the beginning of the semester, I talked about in chapter 1, there was that one figure. I said you don't have to memorize it. Forgot to turn the ringer off on my phone, but I had talked about those terms being important to know, to get familiar with them, right? So for example, pectoralis, that's going to be here on the chest. Gluteus, I'm sure everybody knows gluteus maximus by now. And then brachial. Brachial means this part of your arm, okay? So when you're looking for those muscles with those names, you know where on the body that you're looking. The size. So with the gluteus muscle, you've got the gluteus maximus and the gluteus minimus. Which do you think is bigger? Of course, the maximus, right? You also have the terms that are used, the longus and the brevis. So if something is brief, it's short, right? So longus, the muscle is going to be longer. Brevis, the muscle is going to be shorter. Maximus, it's going to be larger. Minimus, it's going to be smaller. The shape. So you've got the deltoid, the quadratus, the teres. Deltoid means triangular, so you're going to be looking for kind of a triangle-shaped muscle. Quadratus means it's a rectangle shape, whereas teres means that it's going to be round. Now, I don't want you to confuse that with orbicular, which is going to be the way the fascicles are. This muscle is going to look like a round piece of muscle, okay? The orientation of the fasciculi. So we just talked about that straight orientation. Rectus. These are going to have the fasciculi going in a straight line. You have several of these muscles. The one that you're probably the most familiar with is right here. And it's called the abdominal rectus because those fasciculi actually go from your sternum down to your pubic symphysis. So they're really straight. This is what we do this with, because those fibers actually kind of help us to crunch down like that. Oblique. Oblique means just like what we discussed in chapter 1, I believe. It's going to be slightly slanted or inclined. It's going to be along the diagonal. So instead of being straight up and down like this, it kind of comes in this direction, or it goes up this direction. It's not straight across. It's not straight up and down. It's at an angle, okay? So you've got the abdominal obliques on the side here. They actually are angled, okay? The origin and insertion. So the brachioradialis, the origin is going to be the brachii, somewhere on the humerus. The radialis is going to be on the radius. You've got the temporal mandibular joint. So you've got one on the temporal bone here, one on the mandible down here. Excuse me, the origin and the insertion. The number of heads. I just talked about this. The bicep and the tricep actually have multiple points of attachment on the body somewhere. So you'll see this when we get to the muscles a little later. So the functions. Remember we talked about the movements, right? We said that we had flexion, we had extension, we had adduction, we had abduction. We talked about that in chapter 8 in lecture. So if you take that into account, you've got muscles called like the Adductor Longus. Well, that means that that muscle has to pull toward the body in some way, shape, or form. And longus, it's going to be a long muscle. The abductor, you've got those in your hands with your fingers. Ab means it's going to basically get taken away from the center point. So an abductor is going to pull away from that center point. An adductor is going to bring it in toward that center point. Another example would be the masseter muscle. So to masticate, that word means to chew. So if you've got the masseter muscle, it's involved in your jaw chewing in some way, shape, or form. As well, you know where you chew at, right? You're not chewing with your ankle. So you know that that muscle has to be somewhere up here in the face. Wrong computer. So let's look at some of these shapes that we were talking about. So we've got the quadrate, rectangular, right? We've got the rhomboidal, looks like a rhombus, okay? Fusiform. Fusiform is, it looks like an almond, basically. You've got that football shape, okay? You've got the trapezium. Again, it's kind of a triangle shape. Not perfect, but it is more triangular than any of these. Whereas a triangular muscle really does look like a triangle. Now, remember we talked about the belly of the muscle, kind of that fat part in the middle. There are muscles that do have multiple bellies. So you've got kind of part of the muscle here. There's another kind of interruption of tendon, and then another part of muscle here. We call this digastric. Anytime that you hear gastro in AMP, you should think stomach, you should think belly. So digastric, it has two bellies. Whereas, remember I talked about the bicep, right? And it had two attachment points. Well, there are the two attachment points that kind of meet on the other end, the insertion end, in one spot. So we say that these are bicipital, bicep, okay? I'm going to pause again for just a second. Okay, so let's talk about how we kind of think about muscles and the parts of our body that attach to them. Contracting muscles generate a force that acts on the bones. The bones are considered as levers or levers, depending on where you learned it from. They go across a joint that actually pivots. We consider that the fulcrum, okay? So in this case, the elbow is going to be the fulcrum. And they create a movement. So we have three classes of joints, okay? And if you can count to three, you already know their names. Class 1, Class 2, and Class 3, okay? Okay. I'm going to start another video. Just give me a second.